Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast, your home for knowledge. The world is changing, I know, with so many different innovations that you can interact with. Every single day, we're hearing about something new, and it's really hard to keep track of all of these things. This is why we created the podcast, the Richard Watkins Podcast, where we bring in experts, thought leaders, policymakers here to interact, to have questions so that you can tune in from Facebook or YouTube or wherever you like and check it out from the experts themselves. I have to first give a huge shout out to the Science Policy Action Network, who makes a lot of this possible. I know that things seem to be going a mile a minute, 1,000 miles an hour, but we are here to help you out, whether you're a church, a community organization, school. If you have questions, we have answers, right? Whether you're a scientist trying to communicate your science to policymakers or a policymaker trying to understand science, the Science Policy Action Network is here for you. You can find out more information about us at www.span-inc.org. That is www.span-inc.org. I'm your host, Richard Watkins, and we've got an amazing show in store. We've got with us Jeff Warren, Executive Director of the Collaboratory. Formerly trained as a marine geologist, Jeff Warren has spent the past 15 years in state-level science policy positions, including the Coastal Hazards Policy Specialist for the North Carolina Division of Coastal Management and the Science Advisor for the North Carolina Senate President Pro Tempore. Jeff earned his BS from the University of Arizona, his MS from Auburn University, and his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Warren's academic research included field sites in the southeastern U.S., northern Mexico, the East and South China Seas, and Antarctica. Jeff, I've known you for a long time, but I didn't know you hung out in Antarctica. How have you been?
I've been well. It's good to see you, Doc.
Good to see you too. Did you have a good Father's Day?
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
probably spent it doing too many tasks and not taking it easy, but
yeah,
it was
yeah,
it was delightful as always.
yeah. And I don't know if you had a chance to check out did you see the NBA finals last night?
I did not.
So you're too busy running the collaboratory and making the world a better place. Well, all right. Tell us a little bit about the collaboratory. What is the collaboratory? What do you do? And how did you get into this position?
The Collaboratory is a made-up name. Thank you to former Chancellor Carol Folt, although she did not create the name herself. I think it dates back to some obscure NSF report on computer engineering, data science, type stuff from the 80s, where they suggested a collaboratory was a laboratory without walls, but the way it came about is when I was back as the science advisor for the Senate, I would often complain that we did not have, and I say we as the legislature, did not have a good on-ramp to the university system. And that's when we were contemplating, potential studies, complex issues that needed data-driven analyses, data-driven solutions, evidence-based policymaking, all those buzzwords and phrases. There was no efficient way to kind of engage the UNC system. And I'll give you an example because people are like, I don't understand. Is it just bureaucracy? A lot of it has to do with funding. So we have annual budgets, and if you're watching the news right now, you know that the Senate and the House are trying to work together to get second-year budget adjustments put forward. We have a 2-year budget in place. Our fiscal year ends on June 30th, and we'll start the next FY shortly in a couple weeks. There is a budget in place, so there will be no government shutdown, and it's actually impossible for North Carolina government to shut down if there's not a budget. Even the first year of the biennial budget in place by July 1, the state just operates off of the state's previous fiscal year budget. So There are pros and cons to that, right? There's no incentive for the executive branch and the legislative branch to kind of work out a deal. Of course, our governor has a veto, but not a line item veto power. And interestingly, our governor only got the veto authority under the Easley administration. So that was constitutionally granted to him by a constitutional amendment vote by the state. So I'm way into the weeds. But let's look at last year's budget. It passed in October. And so let's just hypothetically say the legislature wanted to study something in gene therapy. And they just put it out there, and they even picked a university. We have 17 campuses in the UNC system proper. 15 of them are research colleges, universities. And just for those wondering at home, the other is the School of Science and Math, which is a residence high school, 11th and 12th grade, campus in Durham and a campus in Morganton. And then we have the School of the Arts, which is also a resident high school, 9th grade through 12th grade, but also has bachelor's and master's in fine arts and other related degrees. So they are part of the system as well. So say the legislators, and there's a provision of the bill that says we want to do gene therapy and we want to send it to NCA&T or ECU Medical School or Chapel Hill Medical School, wherever. The budget has to be certified by the Office of State Budget Management, OSBM, in Raleigh. That usually takes about 3 months, sometimes 4 months. This year, we actually didn't start getting our new money from the October budget until February. Where that puts you in the fiscal year is pretty late. You burned a lot of daylight. So the money shows up at the university. If it's not stipulated who the principal investigators will be or the team, it might take another month for that money to get into the account of the researchers. And then you've got March, April, May, and June to spend it. And 4 months does not a good, solid investigation make, unless it's a lit review or what I call a glorified book report. So the fiscal year and the academic year, they don't work well together. And if the monies are not stipulated to not revert, which means that anything unspent on June 30th goes back to the general fund, if that's where it was appropriated, then it goes back to the general fund. So it's kind of use it or lose it. Now, sometimes they will say these monies will not remain available during the fiscal year. And sometimes they'll just remain available until spent. That was rare to happen. The other question would sometimes be in a study, legislators like things to happen quickly. They think in terms of election cycles. That's just our political system. That's not a good or a bad thing, right? As you well know. So here, the North Carolina legislature, the House and the senators are on the same biennial 2-year cycles. So a lot of people want to turn around and get those data back within a year. And often, science takes multiple years. It takes 12 months, 18 months, 24, 36. With longitudinal studies, there are some projects that have been going on for 10, 20, 30 years, tracking individual people in large cohorts, really building a robust set of statistics behind tracking the lifetime of their health or education, whatever they happen to be studying. So, then there's this other challenge of trying to squeeze in a research agenda and a research time frame to fit. And then the other question was always that the legislators didn't necessarily know where the experts were. And depending on who had the best liaisons to the General Assembly, each campus has their own. There might be a little wrestling match, and well, that study needs to come to our university. No, it needs to come to our university. And so then it would kind of arm wrestle back and forth. And sometimes it was the members that are like, let's just send this to, Western Carolina because I'm an alumni. No, let's send it to Eastern Carolina. That's in my district. And so it was complicated. And I often argued, we need a more efficient way to utilize the UNC system. It truly is one of the crown jewels of North Carolina. And so the collaboratory was born out of that.
Let me jump in here really quick. Like you said, crown jewels, and no doubt, I mean, the UNC system is just absolutely incredible. But I want to back up with you just a little bit, right? Because I think your journey is not one that a lot of people, embark on. I mean, I don't know too many Jeff Warrens. I mean, I feel like because I kind of wanted to follow in your footsteps, that's how our paths came together. But can you kind of like go back a little bit to your time as a marine geologist? I mean, I read that you were in Antarctica. I didn't even know that until I read your bio. That's absolutely incredible, by the way. And I've got some questions about Antarctica that I'll ask you here in a second. Um, how did you develop the notion that you kind of wanted to kind of advise the NC Senate, or how did you come to the realization that you kind of want to merge these two worlds together?
Yeah, Richard, it's a lot of luck, being in the right place at the right time. I mean, certainly there's making your own luck as well. So when I started my PhD here at Carolina, I'd worked in industry for a couple years and decided I want to go back to school and kind of finish the holy trinity of degrees. Didn't know what I wanted to do, but really early on in that first year, I was like, I do not want to pursue a tenure track career in academia. It's romantic to think about being a professor, but when you truly think of the time frame, not only do you have to complete your PhD, in my case, on top of a master's degree, which was already in the books, then you've got to go do the postdoc, which could be somewhere else. I was newly married. My wife had a career here. Tough to move around when you've got the dual careers. Then you go postdoc for a couple years, show that you can write grants and publish, and then maybe you get that position at some college or university. And again, you've got to move to the job because they don't open up as often as you'd like. And definitely if you're being geographically specific, you're going to limit your options. So I just decided on a whim almost that, hey, science policy sounds cool. And I knew nothing about what I was getting into. I think if I go back to, the Jeff of that time, I probably envisioned a science policy advisor as somebody who sat in an office with a lot of books and just waited around for people to come to them to ask their input and answer the big science conundrums. Can you tell me about this? Or what about this? Almost like an oracle, right? Totally not how it played out, but you're just kind of waiting to advise the leaders of the free world. And so I thought, well, I better figure out if this is what I want to do. And I started trying to find internships, and I had to create internships. I went to Sigma Xi for my first internship for about 2 years. And then I did another science policy internship at Southern Growth Policies Board, Southern Technology Council, no longer exists. And I had an advisor at the time that just, I would do that in the mornings and not every day a week and still be in the lab ahead of my advisor and the other grad students. And he still got wind of it and was just, I'm paying you to be here in my lab and do this work for my grant. You can't do anything else. And I was like, it's an internship, it's experience. And at the same time, I had the department chair at the time tell me anything other than a tenure track position at an R1 university was a waste of time, right? Just the worst advice ever. I was sitting there saying, I try to figure out what this science policy thing is, but I would think we would want more science and engineers advising policymakers. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I think a lot of us should be out there to be involved. So that was almost fire in my belly. About 5 years into my PhD, and you would think, Jeff, you weren't done in 5 years? No, Richard, I was not. Because my advisor essentially needed me to do a second dissertation so he could meet the deliverables for his grant from the Navy. So I literally I did a whole second dissertation on writing a computer model on sedimentation on continental margins. But at that time, there was a job in Raleigh for the Division of Coastal Management as a coastal hazards analyst and then later specialist. And I was like, well, hey, how about this? It's in Raleigh. That's where my wife's job is. We live in Morrisville, won't even have to move. It's marine geology, coastal geology type stuff. It's science policy work. It's rule writing and working with the Coastal Resources Commission. It's entry level, but I got to start somewhere. It was really low pay. Back in This was '04. Going in with a master's, almost a PhD, so still working on my PhD. It was 32.6. I remember this vividly. Adjust for inflation, it's in the mid 50s. Still good, right? Still a good salary, but low for what I thought all this schooling that I'd done. And I started with Coastal. I work 40 hours a week at Coastal Management, and God bless them for letting me have a flex schedule. I did 4 10s, so I could still spend Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the lab here finishing my dissertation. So for about 12 months hardcore, I was doing both, in about worst year of my life, but we got it done. Got the PhD, moved on. Loved my job at Coastal Management. Loved the people. Loved being on the coast. I have driven over, walked, or flown over every inch of our outer banks and inner banks, our entire barrier system, our estuarine system. Like, it was awesome. And then I got to take on some rule rewriting and major coastal policies. We are now the first state. We were the first state to have a full-blown sediment criteria for beach fill projects. So what type of sand could you put on the beach and what was considered compatible, air quotes. We completely rewrote the oceanfront setback development policy. We've long had one of the best coastal management programs in the nation, and that just set it even further along. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, you'll never rewrite this. Too many stakeholders, too complicated, too many, battles of property rights." And we actually so it took 4 years, but we rewrote it and it went into force, and it was a great set of rules. And so I got to be kind of the liaison between the staff and the commission and the science panel that the commission had. So it was great. It let me understand how to build a rule, how to write policy, how to follow the Administrative Procedures Act, right, which is the law on how a rule comes into force. Learn about publishing it in the register, public hearings, how you take stakeholder comments and work them into the rules, how you work with the commission on the votes. Like, it was great. And so I tell people now, I tell my students, I tell other people that want to get in the field, I said, the only way to learn science policy is to go do science policy. Go take an entry-level job. Don't think like I did. You're going to be the wise oracle in the library where people seek you out for answers to the universe. You got to just go and roll up your shirt sleeves and start doing the basic work on, I just need to make a rule. Doesn't really matter what the rule says. I need to understand the process. So I did that for almost 7 years, and absolutely loved it. And that was great training for stumbling into my next position with the Senate, which was also right place, right time.
I also think, you got a bit of a swag to you, Jeff, right? I feel like not everybody is cut out for science policy. I might be wrong, but I feel like you have to have like a disposition to be able to work in a wide variety of environments, right? The scientific environment is very different than the policy environment. And I think it just takes a certain person, not so you got luck that played into you being where you are, but you also had that kind of disposition that would allow you to work with a wide variety of people with a wide variety of interests in order to get something done. And I just think that's something just very unique. And, I knew when I walked the beach that I had Jeff to thank for all of this. And like thank my lucky stars for the work that Jeff did. I'm gonna call my dad. He hangs out at the beach all the time. I'm like, Dad, if you like the beach, you need to thank my friend Jeff, man. He made all of this possible. But can you just talk about, for students or for folks interested in science policy, in addition to just getting your feet wet, do you see a certain type of person, a certain type of disposition being effective in these spaces?
Well, I think the two things that are very important, which are transportable to any job you do and being successful. I mean, first of all, you have to enjoy it. Hopefully you enjoy your job. I know a lot of people, it is just a job. My dad used to tell me a long time ago, think of your career arc as a chess game, and any move without a strategy is a wasted move. So, think about every job you take, it's a rung on the ladder. It's saying, if I just look at this job, in isolation, it's not a big deal. But if it just adds to a story that, oh yeah, I did environmental work for 2 summers, and then I did this, and it's all kind of building on, because everybody's got to get their entry level job training and just learning how to work on a team and how to do spreadsheets and how to work in an office environment, right? And how to write a memo. But I think, two things that are definitely transportable are, you got to be able to tell a good story, and you have to have good relationships. You don't want to burn bridges. You never know when you're going to meet those people again. You're never going to know when you need something from them or they need something from you. So it's just kind of like, just be a good person and be kind. You may not agree politically with somebody, or you may not agree scientifically. I mean, hell, that's what's brilliant about science is we're trained to be skeptics, right? You know this. And a lot of people, when they throw out that, oh, you're a science skeptic, I'm like, no, science, that's totally different than, a skeptical scientist is a scientist. That is just, you are being redundant. Any study that you see, you need to look and say, you got to convince me that this really works, right? I got to read through all this and read it critically. But, in the science policy space, I just think that you need to understand that. Well, I guess one more point I'll put out before I kind of take it to the bigger picture is, think of the Venn diagram of two overlapping circles, right? And if you're going to get into science policy, whatever your background is, one of those circles is the people that want to be involved in science policy. And the other circle is the people that have the skills and are able to effectively do science policy. And it's where they overlap. That's the sweet spot. That's a very small subset of people that not only want to do it, but have the basic skills. And those are communication skills. Those are analytical skills. I mean, by the time you get any advanced degree, you're not an expert in any one thing. You're like, well, you're an expert in one thing, right? But you know how a study is designed. You understand data analysis. I'm not an expert in gene therapy, but I can look at a gene therapy proposal and see if it passes the smell test, right? How many people in the cohort? Is this statistically significant? What's their budget line look like? What's their timeline? Can they accomplish this in 12 months? How many people are on the team? They only have one person 20% of their time. I don't think that works. So, and you just kind of learn this by doing, how do you learn that? You go to grad school and you do your own research, right? Or as an undergrad, you get involved in a professor's lab. You do internships, you get exposed. So you might even think, as an undergrad or a high school student that has the opportunity to go and intern at a community college or a local college lab over a summer program, I just spent the summer washing test tubes and cleaning up the lab and doing basic things. Yeah, but you know what? You learned more than you learned. You were exposed to the process. You saw people doing experiments. You chatted with them about data and results over lunch. You saw data on their computer screens. You understood what it was to reset the machine because it needed to be calibrated. It's these little things that kind of build over time. And finally, after a year or two, you're like, oh, I did learn a lot, right? That's foundational. But the science policy realm, you got to understand that science is only one little tiny piece of a policy decision. And so that scientists often can be arrogant. Academics can often be arrogant, right? Many people can. They kind of get in their university ivory tower shell and they don't operate well outside of the lab, right? But there's a whole world out there that's a mess. It's a beautiful mess. But, you've got socioeconomic issues to deal with, political issues to deal with, timing issues, funding issues, resources, data credibility, on and on and on, public sentiment. And so if you can just get, my goal with the Senate was to just get science as part of the discussion. And I understand a lot of times that it was like, okay, thank you for bringing that. We understand that's one variable of 38 we're going to consider. And usually it was not the overriding factor. Sometimes it was. And that was a great thing. And the other thing I learned and it was very apparent when the collaboratory was started, was the partisan nature of not science, because science to me is not necessarily partisan. It shouldn't be. Science is a set of methods, right? Science is a way of doing things. But it was how scientific data can be used and exploited, like anything else. And certainly I would argue that we are extremely polarized as a country. Right now, we're polarized as a state. I kind of chuckled, not to make light of the situation, but people were saying, "Oh my gosh, the presidential election of 2016 was so polarizing." I'm like, dude, we've been in North Carolina. It became really polarizing in the 2010 election, right? When the legislature flipped and both chambers were under Republican control now as the majority for the first time in 141 years, right? Just shortly after the Civil War. And so that was a seismic shift. And being, having a front row to that and seeing how a lot of the issues, you could never really have an open discussion because they were so complicated. People would want to know, but if you couldn't get it out in 140 characters, right, when that used to be Twitter's limit, when it used to be Twitter, if you couldn't give it in 4 bullet points, if you couldn't give it in the soundbite on the news in 20 seconds, your point wasn't going to get across. And the old rule of politics, if you're explaining, you're losing. But it's impossible to discuss complicated issues without explaining. And that's always been a challenge of science. And a class I teach on campus called Science for Hyperpartisan Times is a great opportunity to explore with students how science can be misused and bastardized. Just like anything else, science is not unique. So you've got to have a thick skin, right? You've got to understand that, a lot of the things you're going to be involved with are going to be political. And, and so I just advise folks, like, if you're going to go work at a very high level advising somebody that's an elected official, you're going to need to be close to them on the political spectrum. I mean, you and I both know, you've been out on the beat knocking on doors. I mean, you could take 100 Democrats, I could take 100 Republicans, ask one question, and the answer is going to be all over the map. We do not group. As much as society wants to self-sort, it's like a biological necessity to self-sort. It's really impossible. And to kind of make everybody binary into one year. You're the Republican, or you're a Democrat, or you're an independent. Which is why the independent numbers are going through the roof as people leave the parties to just kind of ride in the middle. But, this has been kind of a tangent. The science, I think a good effective person in the science policy role is somebody that's got thick skin, is a good communicator, is good at analyzing. And, Roger Pielke has a really good book called The Honest Broker, Roger Pielke Jr. And if you read nothing else in that book, read the first chapter, right, when it talks about the 4 idealized roles. And everybody wants to see they could be an honest broker, but most of the time you're going to be an issue advocate. And it's easy in the political space as a science advisor to be an issue advocate because you know your members and you know what they want to achieve politically. And so you can say, okay, I know where they want to go. I can give them 3 scientifically valid options on how to get there. I can also warn them there are 3 other scientifically valid options that will undercut or undermine, what they're trying to do, if you're trying to give them opposition stuff to prepare for. But those 4 idealized positions are interesting because a lot of people don't understand that they're being issue advocates or stealth advocates, and that they're biased. And bias isn't really a bad word. It's everything is biased. Everybody is biased. And you don't necessarily let your bias creep into some of the decisions you make, but you have to understand that it's there. Even scientists go in and they are so hell-bent on one hypothesis being correct that they can end up designing a poor experiment that just stands up what they think is already the answer. They predetermine the outcome. And then they don't even talk about other, optional alternative hypotheses that are out there, like, because science, right? Science is not about proving what's right. It's about proving what's wrong and then moving that aside and saying, okay, that we know is wrong, but these other 5 things might be right. Now, two of these things are probably more close to the truth than these other three. But until we do more experimentation, we can't tell you. And in today's society where you have to have everything like, it used to be that 24-hour news cycle, that was a big deal. CNN changed everything. I loved getting my 24-hour news, but it was always waiting for the top of the hour. Now it's at your fingertips. Everybody needs it in a nanosecond. And we saw that during the pandemic, right? Everybody wanted answers on a new novel coronavirus. And there were no answers because nobody knew. And so scientists actually did themselves, and government officials did themselves a great disservice, I believe, in trying to push out answers while the fruit was still not ripe. I just wish that people had been more honest, saying, look, we don't know. Nobody knows. And we're not going to give you false hope that we know. Now we're going to be telling you what we think based on the data we have, but this could change weekly, hourly. This could change daily. I had a good friend of mine that's an ER doc, and he was on closed Facebook groups with other ER docs. They can't wait for a clinical trial or a study to get published in a journal, right? That's 3 years. They were having people die on them, right? And so they were just sharing best practices over Facebook groups saying, hey, I noted that sometimes when a patient wasn't oxygenating well, I would put them in a chair and give them, 1 liter per hour, and it greatly improved outcomes. And so that's soft data, but that's still data. And so it's stuff like that I even believe that was more important. It's still part of the scientific process, but everybody just wanted that. You've got to give me the answers immediately. Wait, you told me I shouldn't wear a mask. Now you told me I should wear a mask. You tell me it's experimental vaccine, but now it's working and now it's not working. I mean, it was just, I think the trust in science really took a hit in the pandemic. Trust me, there were people that were just skeptical of science to begin with, that were just discounting science altogether.
Yeah.
But scientists did not help themselves.
I tell you, and to continue to tangent a little bit more, I think one of the most incredible experiences of like my entire life was running for United States Senate as a nobody. And I only say that because if you run for U.S. Senate as a somebody, right, obviously politically that's a better thing, right? It increases your likelihood of winning because you've got greater name recognition. It's easier to attract dollars and donors, right?
Yeah.
But when you're a nobody, you can't say, hey, I'm going to be in Burke County or I'm going to be in Pender County, and flocks of people come to your event, right? That's not what you can do as a nobody. When you're a nobody, you have to go to the people, right? And so
Yeah.
I had to go to car shows, cookouts, fish camps, fairs, carnivals, and everything in between. And what I started realizing was that we're like so geographically like separated, right? And we usually don't have the opportunity to walk in another person's shoes, right? In another person's city, in another person's town or county seat. I mean, the notion that, I remember when I played football and I started realizing that most people in North Carolina throughout the vast majority of, the geographical area of North Carolina refer to where they are from as a county, right? Not as like, oh, I'm from Chapel Hill, or they're like, no, I'm from Pender County, or so on and so forth. And I just thought that was just such an eye-opening experience to have to answer questions, hear people concerned, not at a town hall, but at a car show, right? Or at a cookout. It was just amazing. And I would hand out flyers and it would say, I'm a scientist, like on the flyer. That was like part of like my campaign thing. And I'd just be so shocked about people who just straight up said, I'm not voting for you because you're part of the other party, but still wanted to talk to me about like scientific issues, things that I thought I wouldn't be able to be. I'm not saying that everybody's going to have this experience. I'm not trying to say that. This is just my experience. And it was just eye-opening. And it really just, that plus obviously the Tar Heel bus tour that you and I went on.
Yep.
I just feel like if you have the capacity to do so, it would behoove everyone, scientists and everything in between, to not just go visit a place for vacation, right? But try to go visit these areas on our way to Carolina Beach or on our way to Asheville, right? And actually spend time there, eat there, if you're a spiritual person, worship there. And I had an opportunity to do a lot of that. And it was probably one of the most remarkable experiences and life altering experiences of my entire life. Can you talk a little bit about, kind of getting back to, your work with the collaboratory? Can you tell us a little bit about like some of the projects or some of the issues that the collaboratory is focused on?
Sure. So, the collaboratory was created in 2016, and they put out an ad for a research director in 2017. And I applied for that and I got the job, and it was the only full-time position in the collaboratory. And so I came over and kind of like de facto ran the collaboratory. It was me and a part-time outreach person, which was a shared asset with another department, and a shared finance manager. That's all we had. So, in the beginning, it was $1 million recurring and a few $100,000 here and there for some other projects that were going on, a Jordan Lake, Falls Lake project, an oyster project. But there was a lot of skepticism. And in fact, this is where the name for my course, Science for Hyperpartisan Times, came from. It came from an article that I wrote for the journal Issues in Science and Technology that was the history of the collaboratory. And it pointed out that it truly was partisan skepticism when it was created. Now, I understand that, right? I understand why the other party would look at something, regardless of what it was, saying, I'm not sure, they're not up to, they might be up to something here. We got to keep an eye on them. But I knew it was such a unique model. I was like, gosh, but this could be built out. This is the front porch to the UNC system for the state legislature. This has got to work. This is going to be great. And it almost took me back, Richard, to that department chair that said, this is a wasted career. Science policy is a wasted career. And I almost took that as a challenge, like, I'll show you. That's the fire in my belly. So with all the skeptics on campus and all the skeptics in the media and the blogs, and, I was like, I'll show you. I think this is going to work. And it's not going to be political. We work really, really hard still to this day to not be political. We generate the data. We will link legislators and other state policymakers with the experts, and we'll let them work it out. The collaboratory is not up here pushing a lot of policy issues, and we're certainly not advocating for anything. I think that's the worst thing. If you're trying to be neutral, you cannot advocate. So, and I've seen it in some of our journals and magazines of the scientific field, is now you're starting to see a lot of op-eds and fronts pieces that are not the true peer-reviewed work, but it's soft pieces. It truly is op-ed and opinion pieces. And a lot of it really gets into politics. I'm like, you know what? They're turning into an advocacy publication. It's not a scientific journal anymore. And it just, I don't know, it just bothers me. I'm like, just stick to peer-reviewed articles, skip the politics. But here we are in July. Well, it will be the 8th birthday of the collaboratory. We are approaching 560 projects that we funded. We received about $223 million from the legislature. Dollars not otherwise going to academic research. These are new dollars coming for research, and a lot of it is targeted research. It's that the legislature is actively wanting data. Our recurring dollars every year now are up to $11.6 million. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that goes for. A couple million is discretionary. $1.5 million is set aside for grants specific to our 6 minority serving institutions in the system. So HMSI is the UNC Systems acronym for Historically Minority Serving Institutions, which are our 5 HBCUs and UNC Pembroke. So we've got 1.5 million a year that we set aside directed towards them. We have $4 million totally focused on PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances like Gen X, 15,000 plus fluorinated polymers, compounds, forever chemicals. Probably heard a lot about them in the news recently with the EPA's new national drinking water standards for 6 of them. We've got $2 million for digital engineering, which we are pursuing, about to release a request for information ahead of a request for proposals. What we think this could look like is buying supercomputing power, high performance computing access outside of what's already available in the state inside the academic system, to support robust analyses of data and AI. AI is gobbling up every processor you can find, whether it's a CPU or a GPU, a graphical processing unit. In fact, if you were to try and go to NVIDIA right now and put in an order for a GPU, they'd probably tell you, yeah, okay, 4 years from now, you might get one because they've all been gobbled up by the people that you would expect, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsoft, the Elon Musk has got XAI, right? So that will be $2 million for that. I think that's it for the recurring dollars. We've got about $15 million that we're in the next generation energy space. We've been receiving a large portion of the opioid settlement funds that are coming into the state to stand up research programs. What we require is that this research has to be in support of the state. Okay. You can do research just to do research. And if you're in the academic mindset, you want that publication so other people can cite that publication so you can then get another grant, right? Those are the 3 main factors considered for tenure. And it's that treadmill. You got to get more grant money to make more publications, to get cited more, to get more grant money, to get more publications, to get cited more. And so sometimes people lose track of the fact that, hey, we are public institutions. And we also get to work with our privates as well. We've done a lot of work with Duke, also work with Wake Forest and Campbell. But the majority of our dollars stay right here in the public institutions. And so they need to benefit the state. What's a problem facing the state? I remember years ago, a proposal hit my desk that scored highly in the research office, but they didn't have money to fund it. So I looked at it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is ocular melanoma. We have a potential cluster in Huntersville, just north of Charlotte. We've got some money available. We're going to fund this. And I remember our research director at the time. It's like, wait, what? Why? I'm like, we've got this research. We've got this potential cancer cluster already. This is an issue that's very important to a part of the state. So we're all in on this one. Same thing with PFAS. Everybody wants clean water. People have heard about PFAS in the news. I will argue that we have the largest amount of state-sponsored, state-appropriated funds for academic research in PFAS in the nation. We are at $50 million now as of July 1st, and 4 of that is $4 million every year, which is important. But these are big, complicated issues. We started in environment, natural resources. That changed during the pandemic, and we have to get involved in a lot of public health and economic redevelopment work. And now we're very broad. We can really do either whatever the legislature directs us to do, or we can look for projects of opportunity that we think the legislature should know about or might be interested in and can help them. We're also very interested in the higher risk projects that won't get federal funding. But if we could do it at a pilot phase and de-risk them, then it makes them much more eligible to score better and get the big federal grants. So in many ways, we actually help pull more money into the state because we give those pilot grants. We're also into technology development. So kind of like a state level DARPA, right? The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency for the military. Everybody that's got an iPhone, you've got about 11 different DARPA sponsored military funded technologies that make your iPhone work. I've heard 11, I've heard 13, I've heard 15. So I know it's at least 11. And I mentioned my research director, so that means now we have more people, right? I was the only full-time person. I finally convinced the trustees and the chancellor. I said, here's the problem is right now we don't get a lot of money from the legislature, and I want to put as much as I can to research. So I'm trying to keep our expenses low. So that means I don't want to hire anybody else, but I need more people to do this and manage these grants. So how about maybe we find some non-state funds to pay for our operations? And they didn't even hesitate. I mean, everybody I mentioned to said, absolutely, we're going to make that happen. So now we tell the legislature 100% of the state taxpayer funds that come to us go directly to research. We don't charge indirect, facilities and administrative fees cannot come off of that. It's directly to the researchers and the research. We're covered by non-state funds, so it costs the taxpayer zero to operate. So it's a really good model. And we now have the statutory authority to determine our own cost share, our revenue sharing on patents and technology that we develop. And where this is important is, and we don't have that one big hit yet. We haven't had a patent that sold for hundreds of millions, right? But it will happen one day, and it could happen with some new PFAS related technology. We will be sharing 10% of gross revenue from that back to the general fund, back to the taxpayer. I feel it's very important that since we're working with taxpayer dollars, somebody has worked for every dollar we get. So we need to make sure we're spending it wisely and on issues that will make their lives better, right? Everybody's lives better. And if they're going to take the risk with us, so we're going to invest in high risk technologies. And if we've got a windfall, we need to share that back with the taxpayer, right? I mean, they rode along with us. So if we somehow make $1 billion on something, be like, hey, guess what? Here's $200 million for the general fund, and it's funny because a lot of people were against that in kind of the academic setting. They're like, well, that's a totally different revenue model than we currently use in our patent portfolio. Do you think that's a good idea? I was like, and this was specific to a project that was a $10 million investment in some PFAS technology. I said, when was the last time the legislature gave us $10 million in angel investments to scale up a pilot technology from the bench, the laboratory bench, out into the field to see if this thing really works? Because the bench scale, it looks like it's going to be awesome and kick butt, but we're not going to know till we go deploy it in a real world environment. And thankfully it's working just as great or better than it did in the lab, because we had a lot riding on that one. But it was just like, remember telling legislators, like, is this going to work? I'm like, I don't know. But here's the point, based on the data, it looks really good. So here's the point that I would go to, look for venture capital and say, look, this is what we got, but we need to scale it up. I said, and we would get venture capital money, but we'd end up giving away 50% of the ownership or more. So maybe the state could keep this ownership, and then it could benefit the state. And then we could also take some of that revenue and plow it back into more research, right?
Yeah, that is a great point. And the stuff that you're dealing with is, really high stakes. I mean, the lens on this is taxpayer dollars, but then also the stuff that you're working on, such as PFAS, right? And I know that, people were thinking about it when it was in the news, but I don't hear a lot about it where we are now. Like, where are we now with PFAS? And let me just first back up just very, very quickly. What is PFAS? What are some of the implications on health? And where are we now as far as understanding PFAS and mitigation? Where are we as far as our understanding of that? So,
Yeah.
what is PFAS? What are possible implications on health? And then a little bit of mitigation.
I will try and condense this down into a nugget here. So
I should have
PFAS.
asked at the beginning of the interview. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry, Jeff.
No, this whole thing could have been about PFAS, but this is probably one of the biggest issues we're working on. with 9 different campuses. 8 publics and Duke are private, and it's an amazing network. No state even comes close to the amount of collegiality we have, and collaboration we have. I mean, this state is leading the way on generating data and ideas and pulling in grant money. I'm headed to a PFAS conference next week, and people have taken notice, like, oh my gosh, North Carolina is crushing it in this space. So PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. A lot of people call them the forever chemicals because there's a fluorine bond in there. So it's a fluorinated chemical, which means there's fluorine in there, and that fluorine carbon bond is impossible to break. It's not impossible. It's very difficult. It does not break down naturally in the environment. So they call them forever chemicals. It stays in your body for a long time. It stays in the soil and the water for a long time. There are new experimental technologies with high pressure, high temperature that can bust those bonds and get it down into its elemental form. That's where we need to be. There are over 15,000 PFAS compounds in the EPA database. The most common one that everybody's probably heard about is Gen X. It's a byproduct of Teflon manufacturing. People probably heard about it in 2016 when it was found in the Cape Fear River by Detlef Knappa and his colleagues at the he's at NC State and his colleagues with the EPA. And now that's actually one of the compounds that's regulated in the new national drinking water standards. And so some of the health concerns, so we know a lot about 2, right? PFOS and PFOA. There's concerns that they are cancer causing, endocrine disruptors, a lot of health implications. The problem is when you go beyond that, there may be 10 or 20 others, and I'm approximating here. I'm not a toxicologist, I'm not a medical doctor, that they may have health concerns, but you get really outside of that cloud of maybe the next 20 or 30, and we don't know a lot. Now, you can extrapolate and say, well, there's similar structures, they have similar properties, so they may have similar reactions in people. Again, the big challenge here is a lot of these exposure studies are done with mouse models, so they're not done in people. You're going to find PFAS in your blood. It's in your water. It's in the air. It is in products that you don't even think about that you use every day, right? It's in upholstery. It's in carpets. It's in the lining of your microwave popcorn bags and your pizza boxes. It's in no iron textiles like your shirts and your pants. It's in Gore-Tex. It's in medical devices. It's in Teflon. It's in firefighting foam. It's in the protective gear that the firefighters wear. It is everywhere. Okay. And it's because it works, right? These properties that they have, they were created because they work, and they're very repellent, and they form films, and they're very strong. Now later, everybody's saying, oh, maybe some of these are a concern. And they've been manufactured in some capacity since the 50s, right? So it's taken a long time for any type of regulation to come down the pike. So you see the EPA's been working on these for years and years and years, and now they're only regulating 6 as drinking water standards, right? So no more than 8 parts per trillion for some of them and 10 parts per trillion for others. I believe those are the correct numbers. And that's tiny. That's a tiny amount. What about the other 15,000 compounds, right? There are a lot of questions. Also, what's it going to cost small rural water systems to put in mitigation technologies to remove these PFAS to get them below the new national standards that have gone into place? That costs a lot of money. Most people use granular activated charcoal. I'm going to tell you that's a big component of the plants facing some of the largest PFAS problems at the mouth of the Cape Fear River, right? That's the drainage point for the whole state, right? Not the whole state, but a large portion of the state. So Brunswick County, New Hanover County have a lot of PFAS in their water at that point. So they're using a lot of GAC. Well, what do? When the GAC adsorbs, so the PFAS stick to the outside of the carbon material through a weak bond, that GAC, GAC, granular activated charcoal, is removed. It's taken back up to the facility in New York, and it's baked, and it removes the PFAS. Now, here's the concern that we kind of have about PFAS in general. When it comes back, it's PFAS free, virtually PFAS free. It runs through the process again. You never really destroy PFAS, right? We've got some technologies out there looking to do that. So what happens when you heat up the GAC? It goes airborne. It eventually is going to rain down somewhere else's particulate matter, right? It might not be PFAS when it leaves the flue, but it goes through atmospheric processes and UV radiation, and it's a precursor of PFAS that turns into a PFAS. A lot of that happens with the Chemours plant that was manufacturing Gen X, or using Gen X, right, in the Teflon process. That a lot of what was emitted was not a PFAS. Right. And these were unregulated. That's the other thing, is everybody's so quick to cast stones and be like, oh, they, hey, it's like, hey, it wasn't on the permit. It was not regulated. But a lot of these come out of the flue and they're not PFAS. They may turn into PFAS. So that's a really complicated thing to regulate to begin with. So I kind of argue, like, well, the policymakers are trying to figure all this out and they're never going to come to an agreement, and they're never going to figure out a way to get 15,000 compounds managed, right? I'd love to think they could, but it took them how long to get to 6? So the thought is, are there technologies we can do to remove them from the environment now, right? So I could take a Brita cartridge, right, which is GAC, and I could put it under my sink or at my tap, and I could take the PFAS out. But what do I do when that's done? At the end of a week, at the end of a month, I throw it in the trash can. So the PFAS is out of my water, but now it's going to a landfill, where eventually it might get into the leachate and get back into somebody else's water. So it's what I call, we're just moving deck chairs around, right? So I could afford to put an RO filter, a reverse osmosis filter under my sink, right? That's a very effective way to move PFAS. Well, the PFAS that don't get through the membrane, the clean drinking water does, they go out through the outlet that goes into your sewer system. That ends up back in the sewer water. So you take it out of your house, but you're putting it back into everybody's water, right? You're not polluting. It was there to begin with. You're just making sure it's not going into use. So you're just moving deck chairs around. So the ultimate goal is to get the PFAS out of the water, collect that concentrate, and destroy it. Okay. So, and then I'm going to remind me to talk about firefighting after this, because it's a fascinating story. So we have a resin that's a novel sorbent material here at Chapel Hill that's now deployed in the field at scale. One at a water well near Wilmington, one at a surface water treatment plant in Wilmington, and the other at a wastewater treatment facility up in Alamance County. And these beads, similar to GAC, they have a charged interface, and the PFAS stick to them. The beads will only hold so much, and then you'll start to get breakthrough when they can hold no more. They adsorb, ADSORB, not absorb. And then this material, you wash it with a solution, where they're using ethyl alcohol right now. They collect that concentrate, then you can set it aside, and those beads are reusable. And you basically run them again till you get breakthrough, strip the PFAS off, concentrate it, put the concentrate aside, put the beads back in. So these beads, it's the only technology out there that is regenerative. And I say that, but people will say GAC is regenerative, but I'm saying it's not. It is and it isn't, because you're taking the PFAS into the air. So you are regenerating it. But now you've got the concentrated PFAS in a liquid form, and then you put that through one of these new technologies. High pressure, high temperature, electrolysis is something that's being looked into, and you crack them apart, and then the PFAS are gone. That's the ultimate 2-step process. Get it out of the water and then destroy it. Now, here's the other thing that concerns me, is we have some air work being done here at Chapel Hill over at Gillings School of Global Public Health.
Was that Will Vizet?
Over at Gillings School of Global Public Health. I always get it wrong.
Well, no. We had him on the show about 3 weeks ago, and he was focused on aerosols, and that was an incredible one. And I was just wondering if that work involved him. But sorry to interrupt.
Well, no. So what was the name that you threw at me? I missed it.
Will Vizet.
No, we're No, we're working with Jason Surratt and Barb Turpin,
Okay.
but they've got some data right now that suggests that there might be a greater hazard, not to scare your viewers here, of PFAS from inhalation in work and home environments than ingestion through water. So here is the other trick on all this. Like, you could have the cleanest water in the world, but all these microparticles, all these particulate matters from the breakdown of fibers that are coated with PFAS are getting into your body. So my next goal is, if we could get some additional money, let's find better air filtration. Again, though, you've got to think through this. You don't want people just to have a better air filter and then throw it in the trash because you're moving deck chairs around. You want something that can then be destroyed. So the business model on all of this is, okay, if I could get this novel sorbent resin for my sink, you pay a subscription service. You get 2 up front. And then when the first one's done, you send it back and get your next one. All for whatever, $30 a month. I'm going to pick a number out. So you always have an extra one, but you're not going to get the next one until you send back the old one. So you don't throw them out, and you're still paying that monthly fee. And then they could take them to a facility. They can regenerate the resin. They can strip the PFAS off and destroy it as part of the model. You'd have to do the same thing with an air filter so people aren't just throwing them out. So there is concern about particulate matter in the air. But again, we're not sure that all these compounds are detrimental to public health. I mean, there are so many people that want the cautionary principle in place, which is prove that this chemical does no harm whatsoever before you put it into mass production. Well, you'll never get to zero risk on anything. And it's even becoming more challenging as we get better and better analytical technology, right? 30 years ago, it was amazing to see parts per million with a mass spectrometer. Then we got to parts per billion. And then 10 years ago, we got to parts per trillion. We're going to soon be in the analytical level of parts per quadrillion, something so tiny, so infinitesimal, right, that it's not really going to impact anybody except for that rare occasion if it's interacting with something else, or they have pre-existing conditions or other challenges, right? Such a tiny amount, but things that have been in the environment forever, we'll finally know, but it's gonna be like, oh, it's at 2 parts per quadrillion. And people don't understand that that's like infinitesimal, right? But here's the other thing, the firefighting space, everybody's so quick, it's like, PFAS are bad, we got to ban PFAS. We got to ban it from firefighting foam. Okay, there are some studies out there that suggest it's the fluorine in the foam. So on a chemical fire, like a fuel fire, you want a blanket, and you want to insulate that hot liquid and keep it from being in touch with the oxygen-rich air. So it has nothing to ignite if you can blanket it. Without the fluorine, there's some concern with some experiments that the blanket is not as rigorous, right? And it starts to separate. So firefighters get in, they're moving through a fuel spill, they get into a fire, all of a sudden the blanket opens up behind them and then becomes surrounded by fire and burned to death. So this is a risk calculation. Now your risk benefit, right? And people do not deal well with risk calculations. We've had some questions, and we're about to launch a study at NC State. Are these replacement compounds more toxic or also of concern? Just because you're replacing the PFAS, what are you replacing it with? So there's a lot of questions about, are we doing the right thing with the foam? We all want to do the right thing, right? But let's let science lead the way. There's another rush. A lot of fire departments are replacing their turnout gear, their bunker gear that the firefighters wear, right? They insulate them from the flames. They have PFAS embedded, basically imbibed in the outer shell, which is the repellent which keeps liquids from soaking into the fibers. So if there's hydraulic fluid, gasoline, diesel fuel that gets on them, it doesn't wick into the fabric, which would then catch on fire. If you go with a PFAS-free gear, you don't have that repellency to the same degree. So Dr. Brian Ormond at NC State in the Wilson College of Textiles has an actual burn lab. People around the world send him gear. He puts it in this chamber on a dummy, and he's got these 12 blow torches that light it up. So he tests these gear under fire conditions. And so he sprayed PFAS containing gear with hydraulic fluid, diesel fuel, PFAS free gear with the same stuff. Let it sit for 24 hours. Put it in the chamber. PFAS gear doesn't light up. The PFAS free gear lights up and burns the firefighter to death, right? So it's cost benefit. And again, people draw these lines, say there are higher incidence of cancer rates in firefighters. In some cases there are, but they're exposed to a whole cocktail of things when they go into a first response type situation when a building is on fire. Think of everything in an industrial warehouse, an office complex, an apartment complex. Think of all the things that they're being exposed to, PFAS and more. So here's where you get back to the comment I made before. These are complicated, and a lot of people have lost the attention span to really tackle the complex issues that are going to take years to solve. People have a lot of them have lost the willingness or the ability to have respectful conversations with people of different viewpoints and different backgrounds, right? And that's what it takes. It's going to take people sitting down saying, look, let's just have a civil conversation. Let's have some civil discourse here and have some respect. Like, I get that you might be a Democrat and I might be a Republican, but we both want clean water. So let's find out what we have in common first, and let's do that. That was one of the greatest things I used to enjoy doing when I worked back in the Senate, is negotiating between the chambers when the Senate passed a version of the bill, the House passed a version of the bill, and we had to come to some type of consilience on, okay, what's the compromise going to look like? And people would immediately want to go for the firebrand issues buried in there. I'm like, hang on, let's go through every provision. And for all the provisions that are green light that everybody's on board with, let's put those in a bucket on the side and let the drafter start working with it. And then we'll go to the ones that are like, maybe they're yellow, caution, slow down. We might have some questions about it. We might have had some minor concerns. Let's go through those and see what we can get all behind. Maybe we can tweak it a little bit. Maybe we change it. Maybe we just answer your questions. You'll be fine with it. And then we'll go to the red stoplights and we'll go through each of those and see if we can find compromise. And even if we can't, let's not get frustrated. Let's take a breather and look at all the other things we agree on. So if you really don't, I know you want to have these things that we flagged in red, but is it going to hold up all the other green and yellow stuff that we're all good with? And sometimes it would. Sometimes people would want to say, no, we need those so bad that we're not letting that stuff go through. But a lot of other times you could have people go, oh, we agree on 90% of the bill. Like, hey, let's pass that.
That is a perfect capstone to this conversation. What I love about all of this is that you entered into this world and you wanted to be an oracle where everyone from everywhere would dump the most challenging problems onto you and you do your best to find a solution. It didn't start out that way, but now here you are dealing with some of the most complex, complicated issues on earth. And I just want to thank you for not only doing that, but also being a great friend. I really appreciate your friendship, Jeff, your support, being on the Richard Watkins podcast. We're going to have you back on because as time goes by, other issues emerge.
Yeah, well, I want to say one last thing. And
go ahead.
I'm an air traffic controller, right? I feel
Okay.
like, and I know all the right people, right, that help make these things. I understand the politics. I understand the policy and the science. I understand who to call when we need to talk about potential funding. That's all helpful, but I stand on the shoulders of giants. At the end of the day, I didn't do that career where I became the best known researcher in a field. I actually kind of gave that up, and I've always had a little bit of PhD guilt, a little bit of research angst, because I'm not doing the research, right? I'm facilitating the research. I'm finding the funding for it. I'm finding the legislative mandates for it. And that's important. And that's my role. And I'm fine in that role. But it's really all the amazing, talented researchers, staff members, students that participate in these projects, grad students, undergrads, postdocs. I stand on the shoulders of giants. If we did not have that talent pool to carry out the research, and to provide those data and those explanations and those advisements to our policymakers. That's the magic. And I guess I get to be right in the middle of that scrum.
Yes.
And it's a really cool job, but it took a village to create the collaboratory. It's taking a village to keep it in motion and running. I like to think that we have very few antagonists these days. We are embraced by both sides of the aisle, both chambers. We've got projects in the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. We've got projects on every campus, including School of the Arts and Science and Math. We've even found ways to work with them. But again, I'm lucky in the fact that I get to stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's really the brilliant academics we have in this state. It's such an amazing state. And you traveled all around this state. You're probably one of the people that have traveled it the most out of these podcasts. You see how wonderful our state is. The people are wonderful. The culture's wonderful. Our natural resources are second to none. So it's actually kind of a joy to get to help protect that and serve the people.
Hey, that's perfect. Dr. Jeff Warren, Director of the Collaboratory, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.